I am Roger Rasmussen. That's R-A-S-M-U-S-S-E-N. I'm the son of Rasmus. That's what it means.
Huh?
It's Danish.
Okay.
My dad came from Denmark.
When were you
I was
born?
born in Mason City, Iowa, on November 13th, 1920. You refer to that as the Middle Ages. When I was 6 years old, my father moved a family to Bloomington, Illinois, to work for a production concern. It became something that was a lifelong employment. Within the next 6 months or a year, he moved us up to Chicago, Illinois. And so I was raised actually from 1927 until 1940 in Chicago and the suburbs thereof. I went through the grades and high school and a year of employment following my graduation from high school. It, as usual then, followed the Depression, and not too many of us were able to start university training at that. I worked a year down in the Loop in Chicago. Winter and spring and summer, it's hot and cold, and the icicles out of one's nose grow by the yardstick. I didn't mind it. I had a good education, really, there. But being the era in which it took place, it was a different thing to experience. I can't say that I hated it, but I certainly would have chosen something different from being raised in Chicago. We lived in many locations, ending with moving out to the west to Oak Park, Illinois. And I attended high school at the Oak Park River Forest Township High School, if that's familiar. A year of work down in the Loop, and then my dad was called back to the factory in Bloomington, Illinois again. And it happened that, fortunately, that Illinois Wesleyan had a campus there. It's a very old campus, very historic. And I cried on their shoulder, and they aided me so I could start college down there in spring of 1940. I was there for the burning of the loss of Heading Hall, which dated way back in the 1800s. It caught fire one night, and I remember the students standing out in the cold, watching it burn, and I had many classes in that old structure. It was a beauty. It belonged with that university dating back into the 1800s early. You should see the campus today. It's huge. It's tremendous. But anyway, I started working or going to school, and in the process I had made some friends who found me 2 jobs, which helped. It was shortly after I started university there that the events of the Hawaiian invasion, the
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, December 7th, 1941. It was at that moment my life changed totally. And I enlisted in 1942, having turned the corner. And my father died within a month of my joining. He drove me around. You know, they had everybody ready to go with boots on the ground in a world war like that. And I had to try 2 places to enlist because I had flat feet. But I learned how to hold my feet up so that the dirt didn't show, and all I had to do was show the bottom of my foot, and I got in. So I did enlist. And he died shortly after, and my brother, being older, was off on his own. And my mother decided that she would move back to Mason City, Iowa. So I took up residence on the 3rd floor of my chosen fraternity. All I could afford was a bed there. I couldn't eat there. I didn't have the funds for that. But that's how I did get one of my jobs. And one of them was how I got fed. I worked in the YWCAT room at noon. In any event, the Army said they didn't want me right away after my enlistment. They sent me back for another year of my college work. Into my junior year, I had the whole year. And in the summer of 1943, they did call me up. And I had the usual 3 months training in basic, mostly the usual thing. They teach you how to kill people, and that was basically it. But they had, the government had already decided that, having heard from all the colleges and universities in the country, that they were being stripped of their enrollments. There was a very loud noise from them. They were not able to stay open if this continued. And so FDR and Secretary of War Stimson got together, and the government developed a training program which called up, they had intended to call 200,000 students, which is a drop in the bucket based upon military enrollments by that time. And they first planned to make this a training program for OCS, Officer Candidate School. And then they changed their minds, and they turned it into the Army Specialized Training Program. The Navy had a similar program called the V program, and it was currently reached the V12 program, and this was for all the young men who were graduating from college and went right to sea. And I had 1 more year to go because I had been held back that 1 year that I had worked in Chicago. The Army then said, your time is up in summer of '43. And that's when I served my basic training, and I was all ready to depart on East Coast or West Coast. Everything was on my back in my barracks bag, including my iron helmet and the whole bit. And they called me in for a academic test. I think it covered about quite a bit of my training. By that time, I hadn't gotten lost because it was right after my basic training, and they pulled me out of my expected overseas departure and sent me back to a university in Pennsylvania for a term. It was during that time I decided I didn't like the West Coast, but I didn't have to stay there, although I did ask to be removed from that particular program because we were treated as not in the Army. They called us cadets at that point. and we wore no insignia except a basic uniform. And I remember I came back from a weekend in Manhattan where I walked for 2 days from Broadway down to the Battery, and they had no goodies like shows that I qualified for. They didn't allow us any entertainment. So I was up for 2 days walking the streets of Manhattan. I decided I didn't like that too much. And when I went back to the university campus across the line into Pennsylvania, I went to my CO, commanding officer, and said I would like to be out of this outfit. And he said, the Army says, go back to what you're doing. And they wouldn't let me out. So I finished my term there at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. And then the 1st of 1944, they transferred me down to the University of West Virginia as an engineering school. And this was all part of this training program where they were trying to turn this program into academics. The military needed trained people, engineers, scientists, doctors, interpreters, language people, and this is what the program had turned into. But within 6 months, in the middle of the 1944 year, the Army canceled the program. And there was a grand exodus of students who were shipping out for overseas. A friend I made later was also called into that, but he wrote a book about it called Scholars in Foxholes. And many of those transferees back into service served their time. Many were killed, east and west. Very appropriate the way he called this out. He wrote the full history of this program. For some reason, I was not pulled out of school, out of West Virginia. Even though the program was canceled, I stayed under Army enrollment, and I finished, would you believe, electrical engineering, all of the so-called chosen programs, you know, handball and basket weaving, didn't have to do any of that. They put me through 4 years of basic, solid engineering, electrical engineering, and I finished at the end of the year, and they closed everybody out at that time. And there were only 25 something of us left at that point. And 5 of us were assigned to come out to Los Alamos. I had no idea where I was going, but we were very few left. It was unbelievable that I survived. And next thing I knew, I was on a train from West Virginia to through Chicago. And I remember stopping there. My brother was in training at Great Lakes. He was called up to serve, and he went to the Navy. By the way, he served in the North Atlantic as a torpedoman in the escort of the troop ships heading for Britain and looking for submarines and so forth. And I visited him on the lakeshore. It was all in white. They were all dressed in white in Navy uniforms. And I walked up to the gate and I said, "May I come in and see my brother? I know he's here." And he said, "Sure thing, come on in." I couldn't believe that. And I walked onto this sea of white, and I got nothing but, "Are you lost, soldier?" But it was very good. That's the last I'd seen him before he reported for Navy duty. And I continued on with my group to New Mexico. Took 2 days on the train, and it was the cars were very poor at that time. There wasn't much you could do. I remember sitting out on the platform of the car I was supposed to be sitting in. The train was a particular one was called the California. Let's see. It had a point to it. California Limited. And it took me all of that trip out to realize why they had called it the California Limited. It stopped at every siding for every other train that passed in both directions. So I nicknamed it, it was California Express Limited, because it was limited to 15 miles an hour. Took days to get out here. And a staff car from Los Alamos Army staff car met us in Lamy, New Mexico, and took the 5 of us up to Santa Fe, and we reported to 109 East Palace Avenue, as everyone does. And so I met Dorothy McKibben officially, and she called the project from Santa Fe, and they sent another staff car down, and we had to go by way of Espanola. There was no road across the Pueblos at that time, and besides, we weren't wanted to cross there. We had to go to Espanola to cross the bridge. There was really no way across the Rio Grande except going in that direction, but the roads were dirt and laid out on the contours of the ground. They hadn't bothered to level anything. And we reported, came up the hill, reported through the gate. We were identified and allowed passage and taken into the project's area, where we reported to the military post. The community at that time was still very tiny. It was, if I remember correctly, about 3,500 people. Now that was a lot, because in '43 they first thought that 300 people was all they needed up here. I imagine you've heard that story before. They learned quickly. Of course, what they had to do was build facilities for all the other people who had to be called in, so they could open a laboratory inside of this Army post. I have been asked what the town was like. It wasn't a town. It was a necessary community to furnish housing for the civilian population. The military was all right. They had built the barracks, 40-man barracks, and I had one of them way down where the hospital is now. That's as far as the community extended at that time. The military was taking care of mostly the last quarter mile of that street, and then there was nothing more to the project except down through the canyon and up the other side, because there were firing sites out on the mesa to the south. And eventually that's where I worked. But during the Manhattan Project days, I worked in the laboratory right up across the street from the pond, which was a mud hole at that time. I had that confirmed in a recent document that reached my site, where someone else called it a mud hole too. It was not there for fun and games. It was just in the way. If you recognize what it is now, they turned it into something to, I guess, take care of entertainment for everybody now. But in any event, they asked me what I would like to do. They offered me many duties in the laboratory to which I could have qualified, but I just finished electrical engineering, and I said, well, I know what I'm doing there, so let me start there. And that's where I was assigned then, in old U building, in the ancient laboratory. And things went along nicely throughout the spring into the summer, and I found that there were girls up here too, mainly in the form of wax. And I discovered Jane, but she wouldn't talk to me. It turned out that one of my buddies, buddy in parentheses, in quotation marks, told her I was married. So she didn't have nothing to do with me. It took weeks and weeks of persistence on my part, and which case I was a gentleman all the way. I treated her like that, and she allowed me into her life. And the timing of this became rather critical. March of 1945 was when the islands in the Pacific were heavily involved in fighting. And a gentleman I knew later after the war was in the 2nd Marine Division, I believe that's what he was in, invading Iwo Jima. I met him up here in 1952 when I had gained a family and qualifications to be housed by the government housing. Everything belonged to the government, by the way. But in late June of 1945, the laboratory became very busy. And what was happening was that they were preparing for the Trinity test. And I wondered why I was building equipment that went into a tracked tank, military tank, which is parked just outside the window of my lab. I found myself crawling up on my workbench out the window, down the conning tower, and installing electronic equipment that was to go into the firing site area after the test. Before that, we were building equipment basically for the laboratory itself. Many of the necessary electronic items were not being built by industry for something so specialized as the laboratory. So we were the manufacturing group building electronics, but it was that last month that we got busy. And I remember it was the 14th of July, 14th of July, 2 days before the date that everyone knows now as Trinity test. The Army caught me outside the laboratory and said, "You report to a military vehicle up here outside the laboratory, outside the fence, this evening, and come in your scuffies. We were known as, they were our work clothes, but unmarked. You know, it was just green, and I was ordered by the Army to do that, so I reported and to this 6x6 vehicle. It was meant for troop carriers or could be converted for carrying equipment. It was equipped to carry 8 soldiers, 2 in the cab and 6 in back, where there were 2 wooden benches on either side of the bed, and the bed was rather high off the ground because of the size of the tires. Being an all-wheel drive vehicle, it was built for rough duty. And so the 2 up front, which I could not see out of, I had to look down into the cab, and 6 of us in the back, 3 on either side on these wooden benches. And we took off that evening after dark from here, went down to the valley, went south on the old highway into Santa Fe. The only thing I could see was out back, but I remember the trip around the plaza. And the Santa Fe at that time was such a little city. It was tiny, and it didn't extend very far outside of the road south. As a matter of fact, Bren's Hospital, military hospital, is where Sirius Road and St. Francis Drive cross. That was a military hospital there. Nothing back for another mile or 2 before you begin to run into Santa Fe itself. It's a beautiful little place. Well, I remember driving around the plaza at midnight that night, looking out the back, and it was all quiet. I really liked it. And they took us on south out of town on the old highway. It was paved, it was 2-lane, and it was not the interstate that you see now. We got up on top of the mesa south, where it dove down into the valley on an old highway. I think it still exists, but nobody ever takes it anymore. And it was winding and curvy and long. It was a long ride. I think we finally reached Socorro, didn't stop, went on to a cross highway. It was Highway 360, I think, a state highway. I don't know if it went anywhere then. It didn't for us. We turned in there at San Antonio, New Mexico. No relation to Texas. And there was a very small strip mall in there of old buildings, one of which was a gas station. Another one was a grocery store. The military vehicles stopped there. There were others in our convoy. And I remember every GI on every vehicle piled out of there and invaded the grocery store and bought everything he had. And GIs will buy anything that they can eat. This was very interesting. And there were a few other buildings there. They didn't look too great. They were frame ramshackle buildings. And that was it. Turned out one of those buildings was Conrad Hilton's first hotel, in case you want to know. The building is still there, and I wondered how in the world he could ever have made enough money to turn his empire into what it is. Unbelievable. But we got back in our vehicles and shortly entered a gate going into the, I guess at that time it was part of the White Sands Monument, but the military had taken it over. It became a bombing range for the military at that point, and there was nothing there. We drove quite a while, and it turns out that the ground zero for the test was west of where my vehicle went, with 8 of us, and we ended up on the first slope of the Escarro Mountains to the east. If you looked at any of the pictures in the one I showed you, where I was standing off to the east, you could see the profile of the mountains. They called them mountains. They were really very low in height, nothing like the mountains to the west. And where we stopped, we made tracks to get there. It turned out we stopped overlooking the flattest plain I'd ever seen in my life. It was flat, 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 nothing at all there. And it turned out that we were overlooking directly towards the test site where the tower was, but we were probably 5-6 miles away. I gathered that later by the time it took for the sound of the test to reach me, and the ground wave too. We had the greatest view in sight, but this was now the 15th of July, and it was the afternoon of the 15th, and I had gotten up at 4 o'clock on the 14th to go to the lab and work, and then got called to take this route. And all we were told was, now wait, and wait, and wait. Nothing. But the view was great. I couldn't see anything. It's 6 miles away. The Army didn't furnish binoculars or anything. They didn't say anything. They didn't tell us anything. I knew where we were going, and so did the rest of the crew. I did not know any of the other 7, the GIs with who I was down there. But we knew what we were waiting for. You had to know by then. I had spent, since the first in 1945 in the laboratory, and I'd wised up, everybody wised up. The night came, and we waited, and it started to rain. And what do you do in the rain? Well, you can go sit on this wooden bench in the back under this canvas cover, which typical of World War II vehicles. And that got pretty hard after a while, so it was that or under the truck. And so we waited all night till about, I would guess, like 5 in the morning. And it had been a lightning thunderstorm. We were on the eastern edge of the storm, I think. Lightning and thunder to the west. And the sky was beginning to turn light behind us because it was east. But the storm was still out there somewhere to the west. And it was still almost black as pitch. But it was getting light enough to see the ground in front of us. But it was all black out in the front. And we received our orders, I guess, by radio whoever was in charge of the 8 of us, I don't remember who it was. It didn't matter, I didn't know them anyway. Said that they had decided that they would still try to fire the test, despite the weather. I'm not sure who insisted. There were a whole lot of people 5 miles away who were insisting. They were already under cover several miles south of there, where they had base camp. And they were all behind barricades and, you know, everything that went with it. The 8 of us were on the side of a mountain out there. I thought of that later when I saw it 18 years later. It's the first time I went back. I looked out there and said, is that where we were? 8 little tiny beings sitting on the side of a mountain. However, we were told they were going to do it. Tested at 5:30. And it was approaching that. It was like 10 minutes before that by that time. And they said that when it stopped raining, we could crawl out from under the truck and go lie on the road, the dirt, that was about 30 feet above the level of the plain out in front of us. That was the foothills of the Oscura range behind us. And so we lay in the mud there. They told us when to duck. We lay on the ground, in the mud, or whatever was there at the time, to face west, flat on the ground, put our heads down, close our eyes, cover our heads with our arms, and wait. And shortly thereafter, the brightest light I'd ever observed with my eyes closed that I'd ever seen. That was the detonation. But no noise and no sound and nothing to see until our troop master said we could look up and we could get up, stand up, and look into this black abyss ahead of us. There's still, I think the lightning had passed by then, but there was this beautiful color of the bomb. Gorgeous. The colors were roving in and out of our visual range, of course, and the neutrons, gamma rays, and all had gone by with the first flash while we were down that way. And there we stood gawking at this. Well, it turned out we were assigned there as an evacuation team. Whichever way the cloud would drift, we were told we would probably be called to evacuate farmers, ranchers, anybody down that way towards the south. But we were never called up. We never were. Sun came up, the cloud drifted. Apparently it went south. I don't know whether it went anywhere near us. We never knew. We didn't have any equipment. We didn't wear film badges. We didn't have goggles. We didn't have beans. We just stood there in the path of this thing. Everybody else was safely behind barricades and lead glass and, south of the thing. I don't know if we were exposed or not. Never found out. And eventually we were told we weren't going to be used. We were there for security reasons too, I think. So we got back in the truck. And I remember we got back to the base, the post up here, late at night. I'd been up since 4 o'clock 2 days before. And frankly, I don't remember a lot. I was pretty groggy when I got back. But there was no conversation amongst us down there. We applauded, we knew it worked, said, oh boy, and we had the greatest place in town, I mean on the site. Absolutely nothing in front of us, but if they were charging admission to be there to look, it would have cost a fortune had it been industrialized. But we had the best seats in the whole place. Then we got on the truck and returned. I know the next day I went back to the laboratory and back to work as usual. We didn't discuss it. Nobody discussed it. You know, we were all sworn to keep our mouths shut, and I, in particular, I had no business blotting my mouth off either, so I didn't talk about it either. The only time we eventually talked about it was when the Japanese surrendered. And boy, did we celebrate on the dirt road out west. Oh, golly. We knew that it had worked. But we had no information up here either. The other four guys with whom I came here to the project had chosen back in the spring to take their duty out at the island of Tinian. So they were out there on the laboratory group preparing to load the weapon. And they got to see that end of it out there. I never did, because we were here. And I guess that's my story. That's why I happened to be down there for the test to see it. And as I said, this summer has been pretty busy. I was the only one they could find that was down. I'm still here. Yes. It's been quite an experience. But nobody mentioned it for years other than the project was abused. You know, second guessers, people who came later criticized should it have been used, should the president have not used it. And so all of us who were involved in the Manhattan Project during that time began to experience abuse too, verbal abuse. It wasn't like that all those years afterwards. We were the black sheep of the occasion. I remember many people who looked at me and said, "Shame on you." We weren't popular for all those years, but it didn't matter. As long as we were inside the laboratory, we had great employment after that. After I came back, I changed my duties. I got into weapons directly, and this is how I finished my enlistment and my time up here, and I stayed till the present.
Right.
The only unique part is that I got called down there for the test itself.
So after the war, you stayed here.
I stayed.
Now,
Well, I stayed 6 months. I had to stay because I we were all involved. I think the Army wrote it in pencil on my enlistment. I was here for the duration plus 6 months. And they, as I recall, they kept me to almost to the day. But when I was discharged on in Fort Bliss, I turned around, took the airplane back to Santa Fe, and reported back up here because they'd given me all the necessary paperwork. The only thing I didn't have was a place to stay when I came back. But thank goodness I'd married Janie.
So when did you marry her?
I married her in November 3rd of 45, recognizing that this happened in July. And so she lived in her dorm, wax dorm, and we lived in, what did we live in, Bill? A typical 40-man barracks. And I've been here ever since.
So
And
it
I
was
loved-
lucky you married, because as married couple, you were able to get a place to live, or how did that work?
I joined her in a dorm room. She was released from the Army early and went to work for the DOE early on. So she had housing, and I lived in a dorm room with her until, I guess, time went on and we got a family, and we were assigned housing all the way up to, well, let's say, the Manhattan Project was disbanded December 31st of 46. So then we all worked for the laboratory, University of California, as employees. And I gained housing during that time, as most of us did, but we all had to rent from the government because I think it was 1948, the government decided to turn this into a town, and they started building like crazy, and indeed turned it into a town. And Jane and I lived in many places to start with. A dorm room, a McKee house, a Sunt apartment, Group 11 out in North Community, and back to the center of town to Group 18, where I have been since. I moved into there in 58 years ago, into the house I'm in now. And I'm still there. But I took official I left the laboratory officially in 1982. But I came back later on. I was invited back to work. What I did was form my own company. I was a one-man consultant, and they hired me back for 5 years, and I got to do marvelous things. The laboratory was a great place. Did its job. That's my story. I've been here ever since.
So looking back, were the years right after the war kind of rough for the laboratory because the war was over and the mission wasn't clear?
They went right back to work.
Okay.
Now, it was still Manhattan Project after the test, and it was turned over to a contract to the University of California when the Army was called away, obviously, with the retirement of the project. And then it became a laboratory under government control, contracted by the university. And we went on from there. But the town grew all that time, and it's nothing like the early days like that. We all recognize that it was here, strictly had to be built up so people had a place to survive during that momentary time before it was decided that the lab would continue.
So one thing that's come, as you know, is there'll be a Manhattan Project National Historical Park. And there'll be generations of people who will be trying to figure out what this Manhattan Project was about and what kind of lessons that we should think about for the future. So, or how they should think about the past. And what would you tell them?
There's still a DOE conflict with the town of Los Alamos and how they can meet the hopeful future of presenting it to tourists with what's outside the gates of the laboratory. That's up to the DOE. And how the town commemorates its present here in its present state and future state. That's up to the Park Service and the cooperation of the DOE, which is still behind the gate. As such, well, the county of Los Alamos can make of it what they will under the circumstances, but what people will see within the town site is very minimal as to what continues to exist. The biggest thing, of course, is Bathtub Row and a couple of buildings that were used for other purposes back then, and what kind of cooperation that they get from the DOE to be able to see, well, I suppose the exciting part, if they ever do. I have no way of knowing. I don't belong to them anymore.
So you were interviewed by many Japanese television stations.
Yes, just this year.
Right. So what did you tell them?
Good luck.
Good luck.
No, they're curious. It's a different generations for them too. They weren't there then. And the world situation being what it is, nobody knows what's going on. But they're as curious as anyone else, I gather. Also, the country itself, the U.S., they're curious. They continue to call and ask, what was it like back then? And that's rather unimportant, because it isn't back then. But everybody in the world is involved with what happened then. It affected everybody from here on. They won't fight any wars that way. They're only people who don't have any business having a weapon like that. They have to behave, and we hope that everyone who doesn't need that can't get their hands on anything that they can terrorize the rest of the world. But everybody's involved, whether you were living then or not. Those generations who are to come yet, they're as affected as anybody else. It's changing the world, but it happened awfully quickly. I knew my mother was a young girl before the turn of the century, and she passed away in the 80s. What she must have thought it must have been a real ride through history. We talked about that too. Everybody does, about how it affected everybody after that. But I guess we're all in it together.
Right. Well, I think there's something about people in this century who look back at World War II and don't understand what the context was and what it was like to live and work to try to defeat.
Only with what's written. Fortunately, there have been quite a few books written, and from what I see, there aren't too many fictitious stories out yet. Only a TV program, which is fictitious. But it should be as exciting for the future as what they know is what was written or what they've been told, any more than I know what World War I was. I was born right at the end of that, and of course, during my upbringing, everything is World War I. I knew a whole lot about that, and then the comic books came, and stories sort of ended, and the way history has taken us, nobody even looks back anymore to that. That was before now. And now is whatever future generations make it. That's about all I can give as a viewpoint.
Can you just tell us a little bit about working for Al Graves and his experience in the Slotin accident?
Well, yeah, that's getting into the meat of the subject. I went to work for a group that was in hydrodynamics. I'd been trained for that, but I was still a GI at the time. I was a free employee as far as the lab was concerned, because I was still in the military. And I did that within 2 weeks of the test. I decided I knew where I wanted to go, and that's exactly where I went. And I got into an experimental group. Testing the program that the lab was assigned to do, and all I'm really, I guess I'm permitted to say, is it was in hydrodynamics was in the experimentation range of weapons. And I stayed in that till I retired. It was time to go. They don't need people like us anymore. They have a world-class computer system.
So you told me a little bit about, Al Graves, and do you remember, can you talk about how he was probably the one most...
Yes, he was involved in one of the radiation accidents up here. And he was standing close by, and he was highly radiated. He lost all his hair. His attitude in the office changed dramatically as to what he allowed near him. Would you believe that he and I never discussed Trinity? Never. It wasn't something that even afterwards you went around talking about what your work was. You talked here with other people in the laboratory, but unless you worked with those groups, you didn't discuss anything outside of work function. Only the people who were cleared for the work in which you were doing, or the groups, divisions with whom you came in contact. And it was not a point of interest between the two of us. We were in two places down there at the same time, and when I joined his group, he knew what I wanted to do. He was aware of my background, and he put me right to work doing experimental work. And that's how things went on. But you don't talk about things like that anymore. The laboratory is still out of bounds for loose talk. And I guess most of us don't bother with that. It's more social than anything. Yeah, that's life. You go on with your life. And I don't know how many people bother to go home from work anywhere in the country and bother to tell the family much about what they do. They probably grumble about a bad day, just like Bumstead. Dagwood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one other thing I wanted to touch on was your friend Mitch, the one who was a photographer that you had been together with in University of West Virginia, and then...
Yeah, that was John McDovich. Everybody called him Mike. During the summer of '45, he took a lot of pictures. He joined that part of the laboratory, became a photographer for the laboratory, and he took lots of pictures. And I had known him before that, before I came here, in my academic years. And so we socialized together. He was free and unmarried at the time, and I was too. And we had great times together, running around, including a motorcycle trip where my job was to a borrowed motorcycle, by the way. It did not have a rear seat on it. I think I sat on the back fender on something like a carrier, chrome carrier. It was pretty hard. And I was carrying his equipment, which was a 4x5 plate film camera, and mounted on an old style wood very ornate wooden tripod. Big. It was about as tall as I was, and my job was to hold on to this and hold on to the bike with my toenails. And we went places in the valley, and that's the time that we took the historic photo of the sanctuary at Chimayo, which was deserted at the time. Had two beautiful cottonwood trees on either side of the entrance. Maybe one exists yet, I'm not sure. But there wasn't anything there. There was nobody there. There was a community around there, but as far as the church was concerned, it wasn't used. I swear it had a dirt floor in it at the time, but that's a long time back to try to remember details. But I know that Mike took a very historic picture of it at the time, and that's why his daughter has that photo right now. Mike gave me that. He made a very large copy of, say, 1.5 by 2.25 framed. I eventually gave it to my son until Mike's daughter, Mike is deceased now, learned that I had this, and I'd given it to my son. And they made a deal between them. For the sake it was done by her father. And it's a historic photo now. Before it became a photo exhibit all around. Anybody who goes to Shimano now has to enter this revived building, which is totally different from what we saw. From an absolutely dilapidated, uninhabited, ramshackle, doors hanging off the hinges picture. It's a gem is what it is, but it's back in the family. That the daughter of Mike has.
Good.
He took many of them. He took lots of me and my family during those years, of which I have quite a record within and connected with my connection with the lab. But so many of the way the site was right after the Army took it over. It was totally different, but nice to remember, nice to have a town, nice to have a nice house to live in, which I lived in in the past 58 years. But that was after the government sold the property, the whole town. It was buy it or leave it, and I was glad to buy it. That's my history since then, since I retired. I did work 5 years later as a consultant and was assigned work that I never got to do while I was an employee. They treated consultants differently, and I was offered many opportunities to work on into the later things. And I felt fortunate for that. It's been a wonderful life.